Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And today we will be talking about recent, hot, viral, buzzworthy animated series from Netflix, Arcane, League of Legends, a new cartoon which seems to be adding to the growing list of video game adaptations that are actually good. And then, staying on Netflix, we'll also be covering Tick, Tick, Boom, the new movie directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, adapting the autobiographical musical by Jonathan Larson. But before all of that, Alistair, what else have you consumed lately?
So I'm back to recommend a show I think I recommended before.
We've all done it.
Yeah, we've all done it, and it's always good to go back to an old favourite. So yeah, I've been watching recently the third series of Hannah on Amazon Prime. This is the TV adaptation of the film. The film stars Saoirse Ronan and Eric Bana. The TV show is now into its third and final series, starring Esme Creed Miles as the titular Hannah, who's a teenage girl who's also trained to be a super assassin. Yeah, so they've moved a long way beyond the premise of the original film, now into its third series. One of the things I liked actually about the show is that they did the kind of film plot very quickly at the beginning of the first series and quickly moved on to new territory. The third series is very good. I'm enjoying it. In the third series, they've introduced a love interest for Hannah, which is actually a first thing they've done. They haven't done that in the previous series. And obviously they introduced, for the final series, a new villain who is the sort of big boss villain that's been behind the scenes, pulling the strings all the time, played by Ray Liotta from Goodfellas. Yeah, they're kind of really ramping up the tension and kind of bringing it all together for the final season. And I'm glad that this show is actually getting a final season and they're ending the plot. I was worried for a bit it might become a COVID casualty.
Yeah, I remember you recommending this when I saw that they were coming back for an actual final season to wrap it up. 3 relatively short seasons. That's an impressively tight plotline for a modern day streaming show. Normally you seem to be morally obligated to go to at least 5.
Yeah, I'm glad they're not just kind of spinning it out just for like as long as possible, as like some shows do. Yeah, they're quite short seasons. Your first season 8 episodes, second season 8 episodes, final season just 6 episodes. They're all sort of tightly written, tightly plotted. If you're interested or enjoy the sort of spy genre, you know that it's kind of a really good sort of spy show. There's lots of conspiracies, infiltrations, shootouts, car chases, that sort of thing. This series also, interestingly, is set mainly in Paris, but they've decided to set it amongst the kind of grittier, less picturesque bits of Paris. I don't know, the bits of Paris where people actually live rather than the ones that turn up in films, which was, yeah, again, sort of something refreshingly different.
Yeah, I think with a sort of spy show, that's really the genre where you worry they could just bang on forever, making it increasingly conspiratorial, so you got to admire them for knowing when to stop.
Yeah, like I seem to remember Orphan Black kind of just got too convoluted with the layers and layers of conspiracies that they were uncovering.
Orphan Black wasn't the worst, but yeah, by the end, it had become a bit of a wheels within wheels within wheels within hamsters within baffling explanations that could never satisfy you. Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing with a conspiracy, there could always be more layers. This one, they've kept it to a sort of believably absurd. I mean, it's a sort of, you know, gritty spy show, but at the same time there is this level of, it is kind of fantastical. It's obviously on some level absurd that there's like this academy somewhere where they've trained teenage girls to be assassins, you know, although I guess no one would suspect, I guess, teenagers to be assassins. I think that's the point.
You say no one would suspect it, but isn't this the third film or media property about it in the last 5 years?
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe the idea is catching on.
At this point, it'll be hard to believe any given teenage girl isn't an assassin.
And also the sort of premise of this is that the villains have an algorithm that's going to predict who is going to be, cause trouble for the sort of vague, shadowy group that's behind all this in the future. And the idea is that before these people become the political leaders of tomorrow, they're being hunted down and assassinated when they're teenagers. One of the hits that kind of pops up is a character who's clearly a sort of thinly disguised Greta Thunberg. Well, there's a teenage environmental activist who's been assigned by the villains to be bumped off whilst they're at university. So yeah, and I guess there's a clear sort of political message that the shadowy people behind the scenes of this universe want to stop teenage radicals who care about things like the environment.
I mean, I guess if they've got a magic algorithm that explains everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's reflecting, I guess, concerns about modern society. Most spy thrillers or techno thrillers have an algorithm in there somewhere. The vague sense that basically is Facebook in league with the American government to use big data to assassinate people. I mean, it sounds slightly paranoid when you put it like that, but I do think that the show is tapping into people's concerns about the surveillance state, how close big tech is to the government, how the government does all sorts of dodgy things involving technology that, we'd probably be terrified of. See the Edward Snowden revelations and various other whistleblowers. So again, even though there's like, the idea is kind of the sort of Mission Impossible level of ridiculous, like it's kind of pitched really at like entertaining spy thriller, maybe a little more serious than the dafter James Bonds, but not something that's supposed to be like as serious as a spy show like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy or the Gary Oldman film. But even though it's in this kind of mid-tier of kind of action ridiculousness, it is, I think, talking on some level about contemporary fears, worries about where the kind of surveillance state and society is heading. So it's interesting on that level.
But presumably on a more basic episode by episode level, it's mostly sort of a combination of action and angsting about the action, or talking about the action.
Yeah, pretty much.
I've done a thing. Oh no, what have I done?
Yeah, lots of that. Yeah, especially now they're getting into the final season. There is an element of like Hannah is becoming a bit more introspective. She's kind of like, I've killed a lot of people. Will I ever get like a normal life? Which is why they've introduced this love interest, who's, again, one of the sort of teenage activists who Hannah's assigned to bump off and who she saves. And there's a twist involving the love interest, which, I've said quite a bit about the show, so I'm not going to spoil that, but it was actually generally a surprising twist that caught me off guard.
It's quite fundamental to a spy show, isn't it? The old, oh my god, they were a traitor.
Well, obviously, they introduced this character, there's love interest, and
I'm
the love
not
interest...
asking you to spoil the show, obviously. But, yeah.
No, but I thought they handled it well, because they introduced this character's love interest. They quickly revealed he's got a secret he's keeping from Hannah, and it's like, well, this is, fairly standard spy stuff, but I'm on board. And then when it was revealed, it did actually catch me by surprise. And as someone who's seen a lot of spy shows and a lot of spy films, I do really appreciate it actually when I was like, oh, did not see that coming. If you've been enjoying the show, I highly recommend you come back for its final series. If you're a fan of the original Saoirse Ronan and Eric Bana film, which is a very, very good film, yeah, I can recommend picking up the TV show. It's got a lot of the film's charm. It doesn't quite have its sort of wacky visual style that the film had, but it does do good spy thriller.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, now that I know it's finished after a not too massive amount of episodes, and actually potentially has a decent ending, that's honestly got me more inclined to go back and check it out. So, yeah.
Good stuff, yeah. So, anyway, Nick, what have you been up to recently?
Well, like some of you listening may have been, I have been watching the opening few episodes of Hawkeye, the latest Marvel Cinematic Universe TV spin-off event. This, of course, is the show starring Jeremy Renner as his movie character Hawkeye and Hayley Steinfeld as the new younger Hawkeye, Kate Bishop. Clint, of course, because TV Hawkeye is very much a beleaguered dad, is just trying to get home to his family on time for Christmas, but he is dragged into a showdown with a bunch of low-level New York criminals due to a combination of his own unwise decision to go on a weird killing spree in Endgame and Kate getting involved with them and dragging him into it. Yeah, I've seen the first 3 episodes, which I believe is half the season. I think we're basically scheduled to end around Christmas, when we'll see whether Hawkeye makes it home to his kids in time or not. And I think in a lot of people's cases, more pertinently and more significantly, whether this is him retiring and leaving the Hawkeyeing to Kate Bishop in the future. I guess some people are also wondering if he'll die. Personally, I don't really feel like this is the sort of show it's going to end in, and then the lovable dad dies. But who knows? Anything could happen. And yeah, I've been pretty much really enjoying this. As every time they do a Marvel show, I always grumble that it seems not entirely like a TV show, or more like a film someone's chopped up a bit, with the exception of WandaVision. But this does actually have a slightly more TV vibe. It's very much a modern streaming show. If I'm honest, it actually brings up vague memories of the Marvel Defenders Netflix show thing. Helped, I guess, by the fact they're going for quite a strong New York aesthetic, much like all those shows tried to. So yeah, it does seem very much like a standard modern show. It has, a decent amount of characters and strands. It's got a stronger budget than the Netflix shows had to have, actual big Marvel action sequences. But fundamentally, there's a pretty strong basis in character, and it actually seems like it's telling a vaguely tangible story you can actually track through. So yeah, I'm enjoying this. It's not breaking any molds, I don't think. On the scale of experimentalism, it's no WandaVision. So as a fun, sort of vaguely festive superhero romp, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I've also been watching this and have seen the first 3 episodes. And yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying it so far. Getting into the Christmas spirits by, wondering if Hawkeye will make it home to his kids in time for Christmas. But yeah, I think it's been, really good so far. In some ways enjoying it more than Loki and Falcon and Winter Soldier, in that quite invested in the characters. The plot is flows nicely. They've, structured it well, that there's a reveal or a tense bit. It seems to be quite well paced, which seemed to be one of the issues with, especially like Falcon and Winter Soldier, when the plot seemed to be a bit all over the shop. Yeah, I've been enjoying it so far. And yeah, I guess it's similar to what we say about a lot of Marvel properties, in that it's got that kind of Marvel sauce they put on everything. There'll be a great action scene, and then there'll be some sort of witty dialogue bit, and then there'll be a sort of nice emotional bit, and it all kind of flows together very well. But I think more so than the other shows they've done recently, this one, it seems to have like kind of gelled together into something that's, entertaining product. So yeah, I'm on board so far.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, as a lot of things are in this sort of new era of Marvel stuff, there's a vague feeling of the baton being sort of passed to, well, primarily to Hayley Steinfeld's Kate Bishop, but also to new characters like Maya, who was introduced in the most recent episode, the deaf character Echo, who is primarily known as a Daredevil frenemy in the comics. She's sort of the deaf version of Daredevil, basically. Matt Murdock is blind in a way that gives him superpowers. Maya Lopez is deaf in a way that gives her superpowers. And I think it's done a good job of setting those up, whilst also giving Venner stuff to do. As I say, it's not breaking any moulds. And yeah, no, I'm really enjoying it. I have interest to see how they land it, and I'm interested to see this weird relationship they have with the aforementioned Ronin plot point, where Clint snapped and went on a killing spree because his family got dusted by Thanos. In that they seem keen to remind us it happened, more so than I expected them to be honest. I sort of wondered if we'd just be forgetting about that. But no, they're keen to remind us that Clint does have this stain on his moral record. He killed Maya's father, etc. But the actual show is still mostly playing him as a lovable dad rather than a repentant mass killer. Yeah,
I guess they're building to the point when Kate Bishop finds out that he is the Ronin, and there's that kind of ripping the mask off moment of that, behind the kind of lovable, wholesome dad thing, Hawkeye's got a sort of a dark side. They're keen to point out that he's kind of brooding and slightly miserable one of the Avengers. He's not, a fun dude like Thor, or like a sort of noble hero like Captain America. They seem to be every so often pointing out that, like, you're the sort of hoodie-wearing dark one.
Well, yeah, he was sort of primarily a Black Ops guy in a lot of his early appearances. Even before he did his Ronin thing, it's not exactly hard to imagine that he killed a bunch of people.
Yeah, and they're also using the Ronin costume and the Ronin sword as kind of one of the main MacGuffins, and I guess a lot of the source of tension comes from the fact that these gangsters want revenge on the Ronin, and Kate Bishop and Hawkeye are sort of caught up in this escapade. So I assume they are actually going somewhere with this, that, they're laying this out in a way to kind of create a sort of emotional and conflict arc out of it that will be the kind of arc of the second half of the show.
Well, yeah, obviously the moment where Kate Bishop finds out that Clinton was Ronin is going to be a bit of a thing. But yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is in fact going to be an intense moral fable which ends in Hawkeye dying to make up for his sins as Ronin, or more likely just giving up superheroing and retiring to his farm.
Yeah, it would be a dark one if they had the dad dies just before Christmas, but I don't know, it might be a really strong emotional moment.
Yeah, I'm up for this so far, and this is of course heavily based on the comic by Matt Fraction and David Aja, which, if anyone hasn't read it, it's very good. One of the great comics of its era. It's bending over backwards at times to actually accommodate the comic, because that comic's version of Clint isn't that similar to the TV one. But still, there's some good shout-outs to it if you know them.
Yep, I have purchased that comic, and we'll be reading it at some point soon. Thanks for the recommendation. The other thing I'm wondering about this show is, at what point is Florence Pugh going to pop up as Yelena? She is, like, on the cast list on IMDb.
That's true, actually. I'd actually been so involved in the actual plot, I'd actually forgotten that we'd been promised that at some point. I mean, she hasn't even been teased yet. Presumably that's either going to be at the very end, or it's going to be some sort of weird episode 5 detour.
Yeah, I mean, or it could just be a total fake out that they've added her to the cast list, or it could just be some, like, over-enthusiastic IMDbing from someone. Because especially as there's sort of rumours that they're moving towards doing a Young Avengers thing, and both Yelena and Kate Bishop are Young Avengers characters, aren't they?
Kate is. Yelena isn't comics-wise, but I can see them folding her in, and she's obviously, the sort of next-generational version of an Avenger. It's not exactly a push.
Yeah. And there's also a thing they're doing in this show of Hawkeye feels sad for Black Widow's death. That would also be the thematic connection when, they're kind of dealing into the whole Hawkeye's past is coming back to haunt him. He's got to atone for the bad things that he did, like all the people he killed when he was a Ronin, and also the fact that he let his friend die, and his friend has a murderous sister.
Yeah, they haven't quite pushed the sad about Nat angle as much as I expected, but I like that it's sort of subtly in there at times.
Yeah.
She gets mentioned at least once per episode, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm enjoying this a fair bit, actually. It's a fun romp. It may not be the most ambitious of the Marvel series, but it might actually be one of the most competent so far, unless it goes screaming off the rails.
Next in this episode, we will be discussing Arcane, League of Legends, a new steampunk animated show set in the League of Legends universe. The plot follows the childhood alliance and then adult conflict between two sisters, Powder and Vi, who live in the squalid, crime-ridden city of Zuran, which is oppressed by their wealthy neighbour, Pitover. Meanwhile, in Pitover, an experiment to infuse arcane magic with industrial technology looks likely to transform the world. So we've seen the first series of this show on Netflix. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, this is very good, very enjoyable, very strong, sort of character-driven story. Very artfully introducing a huge amount of characters, making it clear who all of them are and how they relate to the central conflicts of the series, and then skillfully moving them around. Yeah, on a plotting basis, this is very good stuff. And the animation is amazing, like all caps amazing. Possibly some of the first genuinely like post-Spider-Verse animation I've seen. Probably not as impressive as Spider-Verse, obviously. I might be biased, but it seems to be one of the first to clearly try and pick up that baton with the editing, the slick use of music, the sort of heavy three-dimensional animation, and the sort of flashy strobe lighting effects. Yeah, it's beautifully done, it balances its whole cast, it sets out this whole mythology in a way that I think is very straightforward and understandable, even if, like me, you've never seen or played the video game. Yeah, I think some of the characters are maybe a bit thin. I think there's a certain amount of straightforward tropiness to it at times in terms of what it's actually doing, but it's doing it so well, it's not really that big a problem, to be honest.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this show as well. I think the kind of core of it is the sister relationship, the two main characters. They really spend the time to kind of build up the relationship between them, and it is a very believable, difficult sibling relationship in that they both love each other, but also they have falling outs over things that they do, especially the younger sister, Powder, who adopts the moniker Jinx when she's grown up, is curious and inventive, but also has a penchant for inventing weapons that she doesn't quite understand that hurt people. And there is a bit, I think, in the sort of third episode when something she creates does kill a lot of people, and it is a really strong emotional moment, and you can really see it's testing the relationship between the two sisters. And then as the show goes on, they build on that with more plot and more conflict, but there's a sense of they're struggling to reconcile their relationship. This really strong interpersonal conflict between the two sisters really kind of underpins the whole thing, even though there's a big cast of characters, lots of scenes, lots of locations, but they always come back to the kind of this core relationship, which is really the strength of the show. And also based on some of the things I've been seeing on Twitter and Instagram, something the fandom has really gone for the fact that this is a show that at its core is about the relationship between two sisters. And we get so many TV shows about men and male relationships. I think a lot of people really identify with the fact that it's nice to have this sort of an SFF show that is about a relationship between two women.
Yeah, I think people have tracked quite heavily onto both the relationship between the sisters and the relationship between the older sister Vi and her love interest Caitlin. Well, her friend Caitlin, who is never explicitly played as a love interest, but it's hinted very strongly around, and the internet has obviously gone for it with fan art.
Yeah.
I imagine there will be some level of backlash if this runs for seasons and seasons and they never actually make that explicit, but it seems like they're clearly going to. Or at least if they do run this for 4 seasons and continue to just hint around the Vi Caitlin thing without making it explicit, even I will conceive that that's queerbaiting. It's just getting stupid at this point.
Yeah, that would burn up, I think, all the goodwill that the show has built up so far. I mean, I do get the sense that there's more to this than queerbaiting, that they're at least implying that there's more than just friendship between Caitlin and Vi.
Yeah, I think certainly everyone seems to be taking it, as being well intended, and it's not just going to be queerbaiting. This is just, set up for the inevitable romantic subplot.
Yeah, but and it relates back to the fact the core of this show is actually an SFF show that puts kind of relationships between women at its core, which is refreshingly different, and also the fact that they are well developed three-dimensional characters. It's a very believable kind of conflict, especially between Jinx and Vi, that they still love each other, they still have that sisterly bond, but it is strained by all the terrible things that happened in the show.
Some of the characters beyond that core sort of group of Jinx, Vi, and maybe Jason, Caitlin, I think are kind of thin, but then again, I guess maybe 4 decent, well-developed characters is all you really need for a decent show. It's just that there's so many other characters.
Yeah, but I do think each character, at least on the kind of the core group, or kind of the outer core group, there's usually something about each character that makes them more than just being an archetype. For example, they've got something that's driving them, that's motivating them. Each character's got the kind of a thing. Some of them are, a bit tropey. Some of them are more thinly sketched than others. But I do think that each character's got something that makes them at least a believable person, something that's motivating them.
Yeah.
And the show does do a good job of balancing this kind of quite large cast of characters, having quite a lot of plot, that kind of also gets weaved around this. But it never seems particularly confusing. And it always pays off in a sort of a nice dramatic sequence.
Well, yeah, maybe this is the upside of having this apparently quite large video game which existed beforehand. Clearly a lot of the mythology work has been done for them, and they can sort of concentrate on doing the characters on top of it or before it. I think it's a prequel based on what little I know about League of Legends. I think this is basically how it all began. But yeah, having already got all that mythology in place, you can sort of just work with the mythology in quite a sort of sparse, confident way where you just sort of mention it and talk about it like it's real, but focus your actual story on your character relationships, which again is what's good here and what works.
Yeah, exactly. There's no heavy exposition or like large bits explaining things. They seem to have the confidence that the audience would just accept it. Maybe because they viewed like, well, everyone who's going to watch this has played the video game, so we don't need to explain things. But this has seems to reach an audience beyond just those who played the video games, as it's been quite successful. So yeah, they had at least the confidence that like, you know, the audience is clever. They'll figure out what they need to figure out without heavy exposition.
Well, yeah, and it's quite light on its feet as well. Like, there's a version of this show which does the same plot over about 20 or 30 episodes to try and do more world building and more characterization of everybody. Like, for all of it, I've just lightly moaned about the fact that some of the characters are a bit thin. I'd probably rather have this version of the show than the 30 episode version that tries to characterize everybody.
Yeah, the plot moves along at a fair clip. Each episode is quite dramatic, you know, has a dramatic conclusion. There are key characters who are, you know, dispatched. There are characters who are built up and then killed off. I probably shouldn't say who, because if you've not watched this show, I do recommend it quite strongly. But yeah, which is, you know, interesting that there are people you think are going to be important characters, you know, who get killed and then disappear. And so, and you know, there's always a dramatic tension. There are a lot of surprises along the way. As well as being like a very character-focused show, they could like, this is an action, like steampunk fantasy show. We want to make sure that, you know, there's plenty of battles, there's plenty of action sequences, there's always like dramatic payoffs, never a dull moment.
Well, yeah, and in terms of those payoffs, one of the things they do incredibly well in this is, yeah, the sort of end of episode huge moment, like the big dramatic cliffhanger that changes the game or whatever. Like that ability to give you this sort of big, huge, obvious, massive payoff and actually make you feel like something huge has happened. Oh my god, what's going to happen now? Does do a lot to drive this sort of show forward. Like, especially because this show was dropped in 3 batches of 3 episodes. They did, I'm sure, very artfully and deliberately give you like a particularly huge, massive moment at the end of episodes 3, 6, and 9.
Yeah.
So yeah, especially episode 3 and episode 9 both ended particularly huge, memorable fucking moments. Often accompanied by a nicely chosen big musical needle drop as well. Good work on those.
Yeah, exactly. It really nailed those bits. And as someone who generally I watch most shows like 1 episode at a time, like 1 episode a night. I kind of prefer regular spaced out episodes rather than binging. But this is a show that I did find several times as soon as the episode finished. I was like, well, I've got to see what happens next. So I've got to watch the next one right away. You know, no waiting until tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I smashed through this in about a week and a half, and yeah, about an episode a day. And yes, it's very enjoyable to watch in that way because it is very quick and very propulsive and very just pushing straight forward.
Yeah. The other thing I absolutely loved about it was the aesthetic. And you've talked about how beautiful the art is. And yeah, no, I completely agree that I haven't seen anything since Spider-Verse that was just this kind of beautiful animation, and the character design is great as well. You know, I really felt that they embody the character in the kind of the design and the look. But I really liked how punky the steampunk was. With steampunk things, sometimes they lean more towards making it look more Victorian with more like petticoats and top hats and things like that. And you know, that can work for a sort of science fiction fantasy aesthetic. But as someone who kind of is into punk music and the punk aesthetic, I like how that they really brought in the punk aesthetic to this with the kind of in the costume design and the way the characters sort of look and made like their both Jinx and Vi's hairstyles and things were, you know, something that could have come out of a contemporary punk band and don't look that Victorian. But it really did give it a real kind of punky edge to it. And similar to the kind of way they brought in a sort of graffiti aesthetic as well, with the kind of, especially with various, like Jinx is haunted by various things that she's done, and the characters kind of appear as sort of graffiti kind of stencil images that kind of flash past, which looks really good and really conveys that kind of sense of being haunted by the things that you've done. And the aesthetic, like the gear, like there's a kind of mechanical fists that Vi has, there's sort of the airships, the floating platforms, military uniforms, it all kind of very strongly fits into this like, well thought out steampunk aesthetic, but they also kind of really put the punk in the steampunk, which I liked.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think, again, I'm sure again they had some stuff in the video game to draw on, but yeah, the general style of it as well, just the way it's animated and it's clearly stylized animation, so I don't know how to use words like realistic, so I don't think it is strictly trying for hard photorealism. It has a lot of weight and a lot of subtlety that makes it possible to, you know, fully buy into it.
There's a sort of a consistency to the aesthetic that makes it a believable sort of universe.
Yeah. Way back when we first covered Castlevania, I think we did a bit of a riff of, oh my god, a good video game adaptation. And okay, there's another one now.
Yeah, there's at least 2 on Netflix.
Yeah, I'm sure there must have been at least one other. I guess Detective Pikachu wasn't bad.
Yeah, as a lot of people point out, Rampage, starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, is a decent video game adaptation. I mean, Rampage isn't trying to be anything more than just massive spectacle, massive action. It's not trying to be deep in any way, but it is at least a passable, entertaining Saturday night film. Whereas this actually does have like more detailed characterization, explores issues to do with mental health and things like that. So I guess Rampage is a passable video game adaptation.
I have not seen Rampage. I do enjoy the work of old Dwayne, but I have not seen Rampage. Maybe one day. But yeah, just to be clear, I feel like you've got a choice between seeing Rampage and Arcane. Go for Arcane.
Yeah, absolutely, go for Arcane. It's really was a surprise hit to me, in that I only think really started watching it because Netflix was pushing at me, and I felt too emotionally drained to watch another episode of Succession, because Succession is hard work. And I thought, like, well, this will be I'll stick an episode of this on. It'll be diverting. And then as soon as I got to the end of the first episode, I was like, right, watching the second one right now. This is brilliant.
Yeah, this has actually also, massively taken off generally, though. Like, I've seen a huge amount of fan art and general chat about this on my timeline. I'm kind of disappointed that I got to it, I think, slightly after the last episode, or last batch of episodes dropped, because it might have been fun to be, following this more carefully as it came out, because it seems like retrospectively there was quite a lot of buzz around it.
Yeah, it's completely taken over the recommendations section on my Instagram, the fan art for this has. Yeah, which is cool, and like I'm really glad that like people seem to be responding to it. People really strongly identify with the characters, again, especially the sisters. It also relates to the fact that the show generally had a sort of sympathetic portrayal of mental health. It really does, I think, show you how Jinx is haunted by things she does. As we said, that's kind of brought out in the animation. I mean, sci-fi, fantasy, and kind of is kind of full of less sympathetic portrayals of people with mental health problems. I mean, see, obviously, Batman, a man with mental health issues who likes to punch other people with mental health issues. But I felt this was actually an attempt to show the pain that characters going through in a way that a lot of people can relate to, and the fact that this has become a sort of fandom favourite, I do really feel is part of the strength of the characters and the strength of the issues they're dealing with, and that's what people are relating to.
Yeah, no, I think clearly they've done very well by putting the characters first and focusing on that, and therefore, people have come, and fair enough, deservedly so. This has weirdly come out of nowhere at the last minute to be what will probably be one of the big culture TV moments of the year. Fair dues.
Finally, in this episode, we will be discussing Tick, Tick, Boom, Lin-Manuel Miranda's feature film directorial debut on Netflix. The film stars Andrew Garfield as Jonathan Larson, writer of Rent, in the early stage of his life when he was an aspiring musical theatre writer and a down-on-his-luck 20-something living in New York. As Jonathan approaches his 30th birthday, he's trying to get his musical produced on Broadway, whilst his friends are considering moving on from their dreams. We saw this film recently. Nick, what did you make of it?
Yeah, I enjoyed this a fair bit. I've always had a soft spot for musicals in moderation, and a story about a struggling creative is fairly easy relatability for me. I don't see musicals every weekend, but I usually see a couple a year, and this was a solid entry for this year's slot. I've always liked Andrew Garfield, despite him not having the best luck with his Spider-Man scripts, and I think this is a good film for this sort of combination of fresh-faced charm and intensity that he can sort of balance quite nicely. And the film, has a good sort of verve and vision. Like, obviously the upside of doing a musical in the cinema rather than on the stage is that you can, push a bit harder with, they haven't just started singing in their living room, they've started singing and the world has gone weird around them. And Lin-Manuel Miranda does some fun bits with that here. So despite the fact that I went into this knowing comically little about Jonathan Larson or Rent, or the fact that this is actually based on a separate autobiographical musical he did, I got a lot out of this. I enjoyed it a fair bit. Some good songs, perhaps not any absolutely mind-eating earworm songs, like I'm sitting here now having seen this film about a week ago and thinking, could I hum one of the songs off the top of my head? And I would have to think about it for a while to do that. So maybe not any hardcore hits here, but they're all good songs. They're all very good toe tappers in the moment. Yeah,
I was possibly a bit more lukewarm on this than you were. It was entertaining, and I strongly related to the plot of a young-ish creative person living in a major city trying to get their foot through the door of the creative industry. Strong related to that. I felt, I don't know, the songs were good, but I don't know, there was nothing really like exceptional. There were no bangers really. I felt there was nothing that I found myself like humming along or singing like the next day to myself. And there were some good songs that I did really like. I thought there's one called No More about Jonathan's sort of best friend who's kind of moved out of a kind of cheap, scrummy flat share into a kind of nice big spacious apartment, and he's all about how he's he's moving on up from the sort of the squalor. But that was good, and like I didn't feel there was like many songs that really kind of, I guess got under my skin, which is what I was kind of hoping for. And I kind of thought the ending was a little funny in that I felt it stopped very suddenly, and it introduces very early on that this is Jonathan Larson, writer of Rent, and we were kind of basically waiting for the point when he writes Rent. And there's clearly a lot of events that happen in the film that are clearly inspiration for what will go into Rent, but they don't really get to that moment, which I felt was a little like that had been set up but not paid off. And then the film kind of I felt quite a sudden stop.
Yeah, as I say, I came into this knowing absolutely nothing, which actually added a weird suspense for me. Like, it was made clear at the start of the film that Larson was going to die young, because he died before the opening night of Rent. There were these scenes of him telling his own story in retrospect, so I was a bit, is this some strange afterlife conceit? But no, it turns out he actually made a separate autobiographical musical about this period of his life, and this is just a direct adaptation of it, which I did not know.
Yeah, I liked that a lot, that element of it, when that was kind of revealed, that what you're watching is, a kind of. And it's done through, because the kind of main plot event is this sort of showcase that I think prospective musicals go through when they get performed, but without the kind of costume sets and dancing, just the kind of the music and the singing gets performed to audiences. And the main plot event is Larson trying to do this kind of performance for his first musical. And what you're watching is that same event, but for his second musical, which is the film that you're watching, and that's kind of all kind of tied up at the end. And then obviously you get his third musical was Rent. There's obviously a colossal hit, and I liked the kind of reveal of that this, I don't know, there's musicals within musicals, and the kind of reflexive sort of structure. I mean, reflexive is the wrong word, but this kind of meta-narrative of this, you're watching a musical about making of a musical, and this is also the kind of a crucial stage in the making of that musical. And at that kind of level of meta-ness, I did really appeals to me.
Yeah, as you say, it's extremely musical. It's the musical about the musical. It's all very musical. It's also extremely earnest in a sort of theatrical way. It has very few, like, genuinely quiet scenes, and even the scenes that might have been quiet are instead, intercut with singing, or intercut with him cutting back to his biographical musical in the future, monologuing about it. Yeah, I guess it's very, very big and theatrical, which might push it to seem unserious to some people. I don't know.
Yeah, it is it's musical theatre put onto film, and it wears its heart on its sleeve. It's about how important and great musical theatre is as a genre. Which it's it inspires lots of people, and it inspires lots of emotion, and the characterization and the big emotional moments are done through big songs, a la musical theatre. It's musical theatre through and through, which is also the subject matter of the film, which that really works.
Yeah, and Andrew Garfield is very good in this. I mean, a big part of his sort of publicity interviews has been the fact that he apparently didn't really sing, like, on a professional level before he got this part, and basically learned to sing in about a year to do this, which, for someone who wasn't a long-time singer, yeah, he's really good in this. He's more or less nailed it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember him singing in any previous films, or I've never heard of him doing, like, Broadway or anything, but yeah, he really convinced in the role. It's a film very much built around the charm of Andrew Garfield. It's his story, and you kind of really got to relate to his struggle. But he is a very likable, charming person that really, even though, like I say, he really sells to how kind of important his dream is, and how like kind of important musical theatre is, and even the kind of bits that are kind of cringe. Like, there's a whole thing about him turning 30 and his life's going to be over, which I guess, talking to people, almost everyone I know is over 30, or even older, dare I say. And a lot of them are saying, like, God, it's so cringe that, 29-year-olds think their life's nearly over. And I get that the film is kind of like even saying, like, this is cringe, these people's obsession with being in their 20s. But at the same time, I know it's supposed to be saying this is cringe, but it's still quite cringy. But somehow Andrew Garfield pulls it off in a kind of charming way.
His sort of weird, earnest intensity. Yeah, again, I think the film is aware that it's a bit much, but I think it's still kind of in character for him, or Jonathan Larson, or the version of Jonathan Larson he's playing.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen Andrew Garfield in many, like, big film roles since his Amazing Spider disaster, and yeah, I genuinely have no idea if that's, a choice he made to do less of that shit because of how little he enjoyed that, or whether he's been just not getting these roles. But if this is the start of some kind of movie comeback, then good for him. He's good. I'd like to see him in more stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he's done so many great films, like, he's excellent in, like, The Social Network, and things like that. So, and he's, got a lot of good roles, under him. So if you like Andrew Garfield, this is a great sort of showcase for him.
But yeah, I think it's possibly ended up being a bit niche, I guess. Like, it's so specifically obsessed with being this sort of on-the-nose musical about musicals, but if you're just not interested in musicals, or you're annoyed by musicals, or you're just not in the mood for a musical, there's really no reason to watch it. I don't think it's going to, transcend cultural boundaries and convert even the musical haters in a Hamilton-esque way. Sorry, Lin-Manuel.
Yeah, I was about to say, here comes the inevitable comparison to Hamilton, and it's possibly unfair to compare this film to the kind of one of the biggest cultural events of this century so far. Everything's going to look bad, really, in comparison to Hamilton. But there is something about how Hamilton, transcended musical theatre into just becoming, a big cultural icon, that the sound and, the kind of the music has kind of seeped its way into kind of parlance, and it's a thing that, first musical theatre fans really loved, then people who just interested in music really, really loved, and then people who just follow culture really, really loved. And yeah, obviously this hasn't had the same kind of arc of popularity, but I do feel it's because it is more, as you say, more of a niche thing. It's for people who love musical theatre.
Obviously, there's a very easy, cheap comparison to make. I know that because I just made it with the involvement of Lin-Manuel Miranda. But he didn't write this. So this is a musical written by Jonathan Larson all those years ago, which he's just adapting for screen. So it's not as if they're actually particularly directly comparable. This isn't Lin-Manuel Miranda's next major personal work.
No, it's a different sort of project, and I get the feeling that it's probably a passion piece, for Lin-Manuel Miranda, in that The Rent, that's the kind of previous generation of kind of great musicals, to the current generation. Rent was, big in the 90s. Lin-Manuel Miranda is a man who's clearly really steeped in musical theatre. That's, again, is part of the charm of this film. Again, I really liked seeing Bradley Whitford having a sort of cameo with Stephen Sondheim, that was very moving, as recently Stephen Sondheim sadly passed away, and a lot of people have been reflecting on his legacy and his impact, and how, he was one of those figures who transformed the medium that they excelled at, musical theatre, and to the point where they became just a general cultural icon, outside that medium. That really impressed, I guess, the power of musical theatre, the kind of life that Sondheim had, and the kind of the fact that he's cameoing here, and the fact that this film is about how important transformative musical theatre is. That all self-reinforced in a nice way.
Yeah, as I say, I'm not a hardcore there every week person, but I have a big soft spot for musicals, and I do enjoy some show tunes in a nice big dose every so often, and this did scratch that itch for me. Even if, as you say, I don't know if there are any instantly unforgettable, massive classic smash hits here, but it's a decent musical, and it gave me my hit of that for now.
The bits about AIDS were very moving as well, the AIDS crisis. I did find those bits were very powerful. And obviously, that's building into what inspired him to write Rent. I did find those bits were very moving. I kind of did want maybe more of an exploration of kind of the AIDS crisis and how it was affecting, especially, the communities that are associated with musical theatre. And it is, this is mainly a film about musical theatre and the power of musical theatre. It's not really a film about the AIDS crisis. I guess it's maybe unfair of me to want more of a film or a musical about the AIDS crisis. I guess we have Rent if we want that. But I kind of felt that was some of the stronger emotional bits of the film, and I felt more could have been made from those moments.
Yeah, I think it was very effectively sort of played as a background thing that just hovered around the time. I liked the way it was always sort of very present, like it was mentioned quite early on and then referred back to and back to and back to in a sort of obvious building loop. I think it worked quite effectively on that level. Ultimately, the film's about the man who does not have AIDS writing a musical, I guess. I don't know how much harder they could have worked it in.
That's a good point.
But yeah, I do take your point that it's probably not going to be I don't know, it's maybe not a massive border-smashing classic. I mean, part of me wondered, sort of, shortly after I saw it, whether it might have had bigger crossover appeal as a sort of, I don't know, they love a biopic in Hollywood, don't they? A great big biopic. But possibly this is just too much, obviously, a musical to qualify as one of the great biopics.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking last week when we were discussing The Harder They Fall, that the kind of the classic studio system genres are very much faded from modern cinema. And every so often there's an attempt to bring one of the studio system genres back, and it usually just creates a sort of interesting sort of footnote to film history rather than a big sustained movement. We're talking about that very much in the context of the Western last week, very much a dead genre has come back. I don't think Harder They Fall is going to inspire lots and lots of new Westerns, although it was a good film. And then this week we're discussing the musical, another classic studio system genre that although very popular on stage still, we don't really get that many musicals back in cinema. And I think similar to The Harder They Fall, this is unlikely to inspire a whole new range of big musical films, but it is an interesting footnote to film history. And if you're interested in cinema and the musical as a film, it's, I guess, essential watching for those fans.
Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. Thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed this podcast, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com to find out more about it, including its entire 150 episode backlog. That's a Freudian slip. And
wow, thanks for that, Nick.
And various articles Alistair has written, which are amazing and definitely not a slog. And of course, we are coming up to the end of the year, so I should probably start thinking about that top 10 TV shows I keep writing. But yes, and if you enjoy our past episodes and do not find them to be a slog, then you can go to your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice review. 5 stars, please, no matter what you thought.
You can also find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence, and follow us on Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast. You can find more from me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can read more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And I've been Nick Bryan. You can find out more about my specific personal recent life events by going to NickMB on Twitter, and there's a more general summary at nickbryan.com. And you can also come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we will be covering, Omicron variant permitting, Spider-Man No Way Home, and Doctor Who Flux. Okay, see you in 2 weeks for those things. Bye-bye.
Bye. And if you're interested in cinema and the musical as a film, it's, I guess, essential watching for those fans.
Yeah, I agree. Might cut that sad little I agree from the end of the review.